So we recap. Um, got together your first thoughts about good writing. Complicated some things a little bit, maybe with that ransom note activity, and talked a little bit about how things can be different in different contexts. We went through some common myths um, about good writing, especially academic writing, and now we're going to kind of transition into going through what the skills are that we're going to be going through in this class. There are five sort of um, kind of universal skills. So like when we went over the ransom note, we kind of talked about how the third letter wasn't as good as the first one, even though it had some like standard features that we would tend to say like, oh, that's good because it has good grammar or it has good flow. But it has to be still has to be successful. So what we want to focus on in this class is more skills good writers have rather than specific features, because features that are considered good could be different in different genres, but skills that writers have and researchers have are pretty similar across the board. So we're going to focus on five skills that kind of no matter what you go into, people agree that like good writers can do this, you know? So we're going to start with this, and this is kind of a big deal. So we're going to review these kind of throughout the term and come back to them and do a lot of practice with these things and try to note kind of where we're working on these skills and which assignments. These are the skills the class focuses on and the skills that your work is assessed on when we get to the portfolio, the things that we'll be working on and revising for and kind of breaking down. So pay attention. So the first one is rhetorical knowledge, and it sounds fancier, I guess, than it is. When we say rhetoric, we kind of just mean communication, you know? So when we're thinking about rhetorical knowledge, we're kind of just thinking about communication knowledge. So the goal with rhetorical knowledge is just understanding how communication works, that situations and contexts are different, and that there are things you have to think about and make decisions about in each individual context, like the audience, and the audience is different or could be different in each situation. The kind of genre, the kind of writing you're doing might be different. Your purpose might be different, and therefore your work might look different. What's considered good might be different. There might be some different needs and some different skills that you're going to use. So the goal, I guess, with rhetorical knowledge is to understand how writing situations work, how each situation is different and is unique and has its own audience and purpose and genre to think about. And we're going to spend the term kind of breaking down some of the skills and strategies to help you do that, to help you write well in different contexts. Knowledge of conventions, again, sounds fancy. It really, and I add genre in here because I really think if you think about the word genre and you think about genre conventions, that really is what this particular skill has to do with. It's sort of a really small subset of rhetorical knowledge because it does kind of focus on just understanding the different kinds of writing that you could be using. When we looked at the ransom note, for example, we looked at the conventions. We talked about the purpose of that genre, what it's used for, and its features. And that's really what knowledge of conventions is understanding how to recognize and use different conventions, different features of genres. Whether it's essays, presentations, stories, blogs, reports, annotated bibliographies, just knowing how to figure out what the style and what the expectations and what the rules are for that genre, what is good in this genre. So some of the things we typically know, like we typically know conventions that are important are, rules and like guidelines that have to do with citations and mechanics and, usage and spelling and grammar and all that fun stuff. We don't typically think about things with genre that matter, like the style or the type of writing that you're doing can sometimes tell you what the content is supposed to be or not supposed to be, what style it's in, how it's going to be organized. Even with the ransom note, we talked about how it's supposed to be organized, what the tone is supposed to be. There might be certain graphics or word choice that's considered better. That genres are kind of the rules for each genre are developed over time by the people who read and write in those genres. So people who read and write annotated bibliographies decide what's good. People who read and write, blogs decide what's good about blogs. Decide what the expectations are going to be, and it can change. And then it shapes what we think of as correct in that genre. So a takeaway thing with knowledge of conventions is that correctness, the way we think of it, is kind of a myth. At least universal correctness, like saying grammar or flow or details or description or conciseness or being brief, like all of those are individual features, and those features can change depending on what genre you happen to be writing in. What is considered correct is really just correct in that genre, in that context. In this type of writing, we like to see this. So the grammar, order, citations, all of those things can change and be different across different kinds of genres. So good writers are adaptable to different expectations and to multiple genres. Composing processes. So I'm going to break this down into three things. The first one, is the writing process. But it's also being able to see that it's not like the paint by numbers thing. It's various stages in the process, and different people can have different strategies. And that the processes are sometimes reciprocal. Like sometimes you have to start over and do things again, and you might have to go, start with your outline, and some people don't even use an outline, but you might start there and write your draft, and it sucks, and you have to go back and do it again. So it's not really this linear, like I do this, then this, then this. It's knowing your process and how you write. And some of that is knowing, like, I know what my strengths and weaknesses are. Therefore, I know what habits I need to have in my process that help me build on my strengths and work around my weaknesses. For instance, when I was in grad school, a friend of mine had I'm so envious of her strategy and how she was able to write like this. She would just sit down and she would do what I call a word vomit. Like she would literally sit down on the computer and just blah, 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 and her thoughts would just go on the paper for like 5 pages. She would just spit it all out, and then she would leave. She would go have a beer, come back, and turn the mess into magic. And it was wonderful for her. I can't do that. I struggle with organization. So I am an outliner. I have to, but in a really messy ADD kind of way, I have to make, especially for academic writing, I have to make like 8 different outlines and then start filling in random chunks. Like I know this section is going to be here, so I'm just going to start here and then start deleting the outlines I know won't work until I bring everything into one outline. And it's just tedious and it's a lot, but it's what I have to do. In order to make it work, and I know that that's what works for me, and it's different than what works for my friend. And then the other part is being able to interpret and make choices from other people's feedback. Not just, I think one of the things people think is awkward about getting feedback is they feel like they have to take what everybody says as a correction. Or when you're giving people feedback, you're supposed to be correcting them rather than just giving them your reaction. As the writer, part of this skill of composing process is being able to take other people's feedback and make choices and be able to see other people's writing and make comparisons and say, I want to try this. This is good. This works for me. Yes, this comment is going to work. I'm going to try this. No, I'm going to ignore that one, and make your own choices for your own work. Critical reading. I want to start with what critical reading isn't. So I think there's some misconceptions about critical reading. It is not comprehension. So I've heard people say like, well, I did critical reading because I had to understand what the author was trying to say. But that's not really critical reading. It's like the first step. It's kind of getting the gist, and you have to do that. But critical reading goes deeper than just like the surface, right? So comprehension is kind of the surface, whereas critical reading is like a deeper dive. It's also not just having an opinion, because opinions can be from evidence, they can be from experience, and they can be gut reactions and based on values and all kinds of things. So just having an opinion, especially if it's unfounded, isn't necessarily critical reading. It's also not just being critical, like in a negative sense, like just looking for what's wrong. I think people will assume that with, again, like with peer feedback, people say they have to be looking for what's wrong, but we don't read most things that way. Like, you don't get online and read things. Well, maybe you do if you're reading the news, but you don't typically go through things and like, I have to find what's wrong. So it's not just looking for things that are wrong or looking for negative things. I want to go through some key words, and if you could just kind of jot these down in your notebook, make sure you get these down. There are some highlighted things that you are doing when you're critical reading. You're going below the surface. You are analyzing, evaluating, making connections, questioning, synthesizing, which means just kind of bringing things together, and seeing nuance, seeing gray area. So some of the skills we're going to work on over especially your inquiry project this term is reading and writing adaptability. So knowing how to interpret and use genres across a range of genres and styles, and also maybe write in some different styles, seeing below the surface. So paying attention to not just the words that are in the text, but the person behind the text, the strategies behind the text. So really paying attention to how those strategies work, like what the author's biases and credibility are and their intentions, and their choices. Information literacy, so just kind of being able to evaluate the relevancy and credibility and usefulness of sources, making connections across a range of text, especially within the same conversation, and then seeing how to connect those sources together to use them in your essay, and probative thinking, like asking critical questions to guide your research. The last one is critical reflection. I'm going to make this one really easy. Critical reflection is critical reading, but about yourself instead of someone else. Critical reflection is about you. It's about that analytical lens, that analyzing, asking questions, evaluating, but doing it on your own work. So being able to critically examine and explain and question your own text, choices, and thinking. It's being able to explain the context of your own work and make connections about yourself across a range. Like, here's my work that I've done. What patterns can I see? What have my experiences been? What are the things I've struggled with? What are the things I've done well with, improved with? So being able to see things about yourself in your work. How have my opinions changed? Making and explaining your own revision choices. So taking ownership of that, and explaining, here's why I did this and here's how it made it work. So really knowing your own thinking and your why you do what you do, and kind of being a good learner. People who are good reflectors tend to be good learners, because they make transferable connections. Like, they take away from their work. They don't just move through the class and then move on to the next one without taking anything away, or being able to connect that learning to themselves and know what is going to help them in the future. What are the things that are the most relevant for them, that are useful to remember? What should they solidify? This is the end of your five key concepts, the writerly skills we're going to work on this semester: rhetorical knowledge, knowledge of conventions, composing processes, critical reading, and critical reflection. You're going to do a really quick little practice quiz at the end of this video.